Okay. So, hello everyone. Welcome to tonight's episode. Okay. Hello everyone. So let's begin. The title is called Pushed Beyond the Edges of Your Contentment. Now the subtitle, later on I'm going to get into it. You see, I find that the human being has a personality. This is something that many people acknowledge. That there is a sort of personhood behind the idea, behind the eyes of the person, that extends to their memory and pretty much how their intelligence is. Now, when we look at a person's personality, a sense of personhood has to do with a sort of individual in a world. So the sense of a person's personality often has to do in regards to their response to the world. If somebody in some sense reacts to the world very quickly, they are in some sense seen as naive. If they are seen, do you see what I'm saying? Like there's various ways that the personality is actually kept in stories. So pretty much you begin to see that the contentment of people is how much the personality has been allowed freedom of a movement. The darkness of man's mind has to do with the morality of the past wanting to continue into the future. Each sense of personality has to do with certain conditions of right and wrong, conditions of value, how much the person in that moment is acknowledging the emptiness of reality, how much the person is acknowledging the fullness of reality, how much the person is acknowledging the emptiness of imagination, how much the person is acknowledging the fullness of imagination. In some sense, when the child goes into the educational system in this world, where does it find itself? It finds itself being spoon-fed ideology. As it is being spoon-fed ideology, sometimes it doesn't want to eat the ideology, and it's this kind of very bad transmission of knowledge to the younger generations. Because rather than exciting them in the process, making school a valuable place, if schools paid children, do you know how many kids would continue studying? If the educational system said, child, if you can solve this problem, you'll get like, $50 or something, that child would run. The child would run to open its mind, even though it's egoic desire. It's kind of like we're fooling people's ego into intelligence. So in some sense, the sense of person, as it is being raised in this world, it eventually builds a story, and the factor that can still change in the story tends to be considered the free will. The conditions of the world will eventually contain the person into some belief. You know, in this life, it's where if you do nothing, beliefs will come to you. You will make conclusions in accordance to your experiential intensity rather than to actually what is here. You will get convinced by your mind before you actually see what the world looks like. There's a very chaotic kind of episode in this TV show called Love, Death, and Robots. And in this TV show, there's an episode, I think it's episode 18, where it's called Beyond the Aquila Rift. And pretty much it's like this person who has gone so far out of space where they have come into like a simulation. Like, I'm not going to give away what happens in the episode, it's really chaotic. But it's kind of like waking up to the true nature of things beyond just, beyond the, it's like you move beyond the acceptance of reality. And that's something that not everybody can do because they're spoon fed their beliefs since their childhood. How often do you think the average human being thinks? If you go to a kid and you're like, what's the point of education? He's like, you become the greatest business owner in the world. Like, you study education and become like rich. Children are following, and money has replaced their mythology. What inspires them is money, not the stories of their ancestors, not the stories of the civilization. Children are being, in some sense, money is taking their attention from themselves. And of course, what can you do? We're animals who must now survive in a concrete jungle, you know? For me, I feel everybody has blind spots. Because everybody has blind spots, we find ourselves in a unique position. Imagine there's 8 billion, not don't imagine like this is the actual case, there's like 8 billion plus human beings on this planet. Now imagine one person suddenly having access to the view of 7 billion people, like 7,99999 billion people, you know? And so you see, it's like a situation where you would have access to all those views which cover your blind spots. I feel humanity must build a network that is self-sustaining. Businessmen around the world have this mentality that the best way to make money is to be, you're still making money even when you're sleeping. Like, that's when you know you've made it. When you can make money and not even work. Your money is pretty much working for you in that position. Now, that system implies self-sustenance, self-maintenance. So humanity should build a network where human beings can find at least a human community, at least an environment where they're being acknowledged not based on how they look, they're being acknowledged by the nature of their vision, by the depth of their vision. You see, for us, unfortunately, because we've had shitty, excuse my language, with like terrible leaders, you know, like, you know that mushroom, shiitake mushroom? So it's like we've had shiitake politics, you know? And what I mean by that is, like, I'm not disrespecting the evolution of the political system. It's a fascination for me. The fact that democracy has come to be even in consideration is a magnificent evolutionary step. But the thing is, it's not just about democracy. It has to do with the adjustment to the people's intelligence. Because there were fascists, because there were tyrants, in some sense, people thought unity was madness. You go to many scholars of politics and many modern philosophers and ask them about a global community, they will tell you it'll be anarchy. It's as if it'll be like suddenly some person's going to try to take over the whole thing. And I find that's confusion. To try to own something in a temporary world is just a play of forms. Life has a value not always in the sense that it has to have a future. You don't have to always have a heaven there. Sometimes there's just earth here. You don't know enough to know about heaven. You don't know enough to know about hell. You don't know enough to know what chaos is, and you don't know enough to know what order is. And so you're simply standing in a moment of grand design. And these designs do not have to mean anything, but they can mean anything. And so the relationship with one's attention leads to kind of transformation with the person's relationship with language. The transformation with the relationship with language is kind of like the way the story contains the identity is in some sense changing. Now, what that means is your story is the edge of your contentment. That means if you believe you're just one kind of person, the moment something makes you feel like you're not that person, you have reached the edge of your contentment and you will probably move in an offensive mode. Trust me, some people have this mentality where the best defense is offense. So the person feels threatened and therefore attacks first. Sometimes life doesn't have a purpose aside from what it's being. But sometimes what it's being can design, can divide the world into various ways where it could have more color, it could have more brilliance. The only reason the notion of the soul is entertaining simply because it's suggesting there's more. And when we see that there is more, there comes this hope in the mind of the being. That we're not here only to kind of discover, I'll tell you this, people should not worship any sort of teacher at all. That's a confusion. There's no such thing as a disciple and a guru. The guru is doing the same thing that the mirror in a, like, the bathroom mirror window, not window, the bathroom mirror can do. So it's a reflection. The external guru is a reflection of your inner guru. The reflection of the inner guru is the realization of the outer guru. So what that means is you realize any person you have seen in this life, your mind has been animating the moment. Therefore, your mind is your teacher. And then comes the reverse engineering, a sort of kind of like if we filmed a supernova explosion, imagine we're rewinding it. And in some sense, there's a sort of reverse engineering of an explosion of imprints of meaning upon the world. The world becomes a still and silent place, and there the witness of the moving reality is seen, not a sort of prime mover or a sort of ideologically kind of describable divine agency. It is just the nature of the world. It sings without lips of comprehension that can be comprehended, that cannot be comprehended. It's like the unknown moves the knowledge. So pretty much man has two sorts of relationship in this planet. There was a sage. They asked this sage, they're like, yo, man, what do I do here on this world? And the sage was badass. And the sage is like, there's only two things you can do. And the guy's like, what are those two things? And the sage said, the sage said that you can either trust the world or distrust it. That's it. All choices come down to that. All futures come down to this. If the present moment trusts what is here and where it is, or if it distrusts it. The wise sage would say, trust it, because what else can you do? Seriously, what else can I do? In this moment there appears the objective component of an existence of a body. At the same time, there are thoughts and there's a mind here and there's something moving this animate form. So this movement, I keep trying to philosophize its individual existence, yet I find that the mind and body could never be separate. Any sort of way I have thought I have cut the cake has never been cut. In my mind, it has. The world is divided into many ways, but the cake has never been cut. existence never went anywhere. Truth never changed. Therefore, what is change? Change is the truth. Change is the only thing that doesn't change, if you haven't noticed. This requires a sort of completely, totally new confrontation of the elements of the world. And before the periodic table, the ancients acknowledged the five elements: earth, air, fire, water, and ether. Ether. I'll call it ether. And ether was space. And so, how profound was it that in ancient times they saw space as an element? Yet in modern times, space is like the container of all elements. An element was transformed into a container, if there was somebody back in the day seeing how we're seeing it now. So those elements before the periodic table, there were not just suggestions of atoms, substance-wise. These elements were just ways that the manifest existence moved. Sometimes it moved like fire. Sometimes it moved like water. Sometimes it was just like earth. And sometimes it in some sense blew like air. And so life has many ways it shows itself. This is why if somebody was to make a film about you, you would be one of the most complex characters in existence, if we had access to the inner realities. Now, me personally, when I hear technology is exponentially growing, and I hear Elon Musk speak about the future, and I hear Ray Kurzweil, he's a futurist. I mean, you have no choice but to hear whatever he says. You think about the future, and so it's one of those situations where the technological reality is now invading the inner space of the being. When robots begin to actually speak, we're going to see a sort of unique branch of poetry. It's going to be AI poetry. Okay, this AI poetry will suddenly seem incredible to the human being because it's a display of a level of precision. However, for me, intelligence has to do with an access to minds. So in some sense, you see right now the human being thinks nobody can see their thoughts. But what if I told you from the moment of your birth, every living being on this planet knew how you were being? What if I told you that? You would in some sense throw away that idea. You'd be like, no, I'm an individual person in a world. I'm just this body. These thoughts are a hallucination of brain chemistry. I am just this matter in empty space, particles in empty space, somehow being a hallucination of the intelligence of the free will of the human being. And Mr. Within would say, you are imagining the forest has been burnt before it actually has. It is too easy to see nothing here. That's the most easiest thing. To see it's all nothing. Yay. Good job, whoever who found nihilism. Nice. It's like you're looking at an empty piece of paper. What's crucial is, why is that empty piece of paper here? And why is the evolution, the design of the pen in our hand? It's incredible. We must not forget our relationship with nature, kind of like our minds are surfing in the material realm. And so, of course, when you look at the person's personality, once they move beyond their contentment, Sorry guys, I had to just do something quickly. Something important to know that these talks that I give, they are kind of like explorations into the nature of the design of how the moment appears to me. And so pretty much when I ask the question or when I look at the title, I wonder about what is the most realist thing about the words I see, the symbols, the way the data is shown to me throughout the day. I'm trying to think where all of this life is going. Just if me personally, if all the senses of me and all the memories I've had, all the versions of me and all my memories right now were standing beside me and were asking me what is the point of all this existence. I wonder what I would tell the grand audience of myself. And if I was to throw back Thor's hammer into the sky, back into where he dropped it, I would say it all comes down to the value of the individual lifetime remembering the collective vision. I feel we are drops that will become streams. These streams will find each other and become a river. These rivers will eventually go through a waterfall, a sort of dimensional shift, and then a dimensional return. And what's going to happen next is that they're going to find the ocean. So I find that the person's lifetime is very similar. That you start off as this drop, as this individual, as this thing here in this world, in this massive world. You know, as the British say, massive. Massive, man. But anyways, what I'm trying to say, like, the notion is that it's individual. Life has an individual purpose for, let's say, I think half of life, the half of the lifetime is individual. This doesn't mean collective experiences don't occur, they always do occur. But the thing is, it's mainly this, the attention of the being is on how they're an individual. So this drop, if you notice a drop, if it doesn't move, it evaporates and returns to the sky. But if the drop moves, it experiences a sort of stream, a sort of river, and eventually the ocean. And the ocean is the evolution of the material existence. So the yogi, the enlightened yogi, their approach, the approach of the Buddha, we find in sort of kind of the archetypes of Buddhism. The Buddha was satisfied by not doing anything, going in meditation in a cave and evaporating the sense of self. Just like a drop not moving and it evaporates. But when people move, the drops merge. They merge into streams, rivers. And what that means is that's when the path of the bodhisattva arrives. The Buddha is like a drop, the bodhisattva is like a river returning to the ocean. So what I'm saying is that it's very fascinating. There's no heaven and hell. There's two sorts of evolution. There's a sort of material experience. It all has to do what kind of journey you want to take, how long you want to take. You know, you want to take the long road or the short road, or it doesn't even matter. It's the type of ride, kind of how the moment is a vehicle of your attention. We have to eventually land our hearts somewhere if it's externally driven. When a person does one activity for a long time, they will eventually ask themselves, why am I doing this? What is this being done for? They wonder if they have the heart to continue. What that means, the dedication, the intention, the vision, the will, the openness to the advancement of seeing what will happen next. I feel we are the species has an external individual manifestation now. We don't know what the greater efficient movement of civilization will look like. Right now, I don't think anybody who's alive, all we can do is plant the seeds for it. We can just develop the conditions for the greatest ideas on this planet to find an honest global stage, where in that global stage, the greatness of humanity is where the honor and dignity of life comes from. Your species is alive now. Your species has many decisions to make. You are like a limb of your species. Like a cat, the species, if it's a caterpillar intended to go towards a metamorphosis, you are like a leg of this caterpillar. You are a part of the human design. Now, as part of the human species, the species will eventually evolve. It evolves through its identity and how much language is spread around in the world. Language primarily is just imagery. So the question comes, what's beyond an image? And the moment is too still to have an answer. This is why there's this great Sufi mystic poet by the name of Rumi. He says, silence is the language of God. All else is poor translation. It's that complete serenity in the ocean that makes the river's life complete. So if your life is moving at a certain speed, it's as if you're not in the ocean yet. Your intelligence has a part to play still in this cosmic play. Rumi also says, out beyond ideas of right doing and wrong doing, there is a place. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies on that grass, the world is too full to talk about. We have to as a species wonder what our evolution means and what the value of the human being is. Any civilization that is unhealthy, it's a symptom of how inefficiently the human being is being valued. Once the human being is valued, they will begin becoming responsible for what others consider to be valuable. Have you noticed, like, this is like a testament to some parents out there in the world where they see their child after a moment of the child's failure, and the parent, in some sense, tell the child to stand up simply. And it becomes a sort of situation where rather than being defined by the obstacle, it's okay, you fail, yet that feedback is your next attempt's victory. is the fuel for your next attempt's victory. And the world is spread out into many ways. Every person's mind is holding the world in their own unique multidimensional axis. Literally, how you see the layers and dimensions to the world are different than how other human beings see. So we're kind of like the many different eyes of this universal sector. We are moments of sight. In this sight, as there's animation, there's movement, there we find the eternal. Plato says time is the moving image of eternity, which is pretty much saying anything that happens in time, in the domain of time, is an eternal movement. So you see, we move beyond towers of belief and beyond the atmospheres of abstraction. We find the unforgotten paradise in Earth's eyes. That means it's like there's a notion paradise is out there somewhere, and there's a notion that paradise is here and now. The only way you can see paradise is here and now is by acknowledging that your mind has the heaven and hell are states of mind. But when you acknowledge them as external locations, then there is a sort of sub-psychology thrown into your subconscious. It's as if you've unleashed a sort of program in the background of your mind because it happens. Like in this life, you can't be aware of everything all the time, but you got to just see how the data arrives. Pretty much a lot of this life, before you have a belief system, it's like a moment of data processing. The sensory activity is displayed in some manner, and the person's attention, there is a conscious observer. The fact that, like, think about it, why does the word soul exist in the dictionary? Why have so many human beings in history? It's kind of been like an oscillation, kind of up and down, of how there were civilizations that had a spiritual kind of metaphysical agreement, and there have been civilizations with they've had a kind of metaphysical disagreement on the nature. So in some sense, there has been civilizations that people have shouted were just objects, and there's civilizations where people have shouted they're subjects. Excuse me. And pretty much this whole thing has kind of gone back and forth. Now, in this constant up and down, even though like kind of it's like a sine wave of this, it's as if there is a sort of like you cannot find a great beautiful vision of order without there being chaos. Unfortunately, chaos is the twin brother of order. And so what that means is that opposites it's not that opposites attract, it's just the notion that the environment displays itself in various modes, and the person's conscious free will is a participation in the moment's design as a doer, as an individual form. So you learn to navigate as your mind being a body and your body being a mind. What that means is there's moments in this life where how life will appear to you is that you're purely an objective being because you got to run to work, you're late. And there's moments where you're going to see you're completely a subjective being right that moment before you fall asleep, and you're just wondering how the day was and what kind of day you lived and what your life means and where it's all going, and suddenly, ta-da, you're asleep. Because man's mind, not everybody's mind has enough of a wilderness to explore the infinite. The infinite is a concept that if people truly wondered about it, it would be the edge of their imagination. It's as if you imagining something moving. Imagine like a canoe moving in your backyard. Now imagine that canoe shooting into the sky at the speed of light. Like you will see, your imagination cannot surpass the speed of light because the speed of light is the sensory data. So it's kind of like thinking that the imagination moves slower than the speed of light. But me personally, I feel light is, we think it has speed, but it's the field. It's a glimmer of the field and the surf. It's like suddenly we recognize underneath the ice there is an unknown kind of depth. So sometimes these archetypes, these values that you see echoing in the vastness of this life, these archetypes will demand things from you. Sometimes when you enter a system, it's the exchange of it is the design of the system. When you sign a contract, you're bound to the contract. So if the destiny of the contract is good, it's like a destined goodness. If it's bad, it's a destined badness, whatever you like. And so it has to do with the archetypes. Your free will, before it's actually being the decision of a person, is being the witness of various moments where data similar to the pattern present now has been acknowledged. So behind your eyes, instantaneously, even quicker than the speed of light, that's one thing I guess I can say, is that even though I said your imagination moves slower than the speed of light, but your attention is quicker than the speed of light. It's an instantaneous awakening to a world. That instantaneous awakening to a world surpasses any sort of measurement of speed. It's an instant where the world is here, and in an instant it may leave, but in an instant it may return, and the eternal is forever unseen. It's kind of like the dance of temporal forces, the movement of a lifetime, the glory of the evolution of eons of attention. And I personally find our consciousness definitely has to do with that massive flaming kind of ball that's called the sun. And these light beams have been bombarding the earth endlessly, showering the earth 360 degrees endlessly, as if gravity has made this planet of ours to have all over the planet to receive light because of the way it orbits. It's like a unique celestial design. Now, what I feel, this constant exposure to light is so crucial. I could totally see how the ancient Egyptians kind of were enticed to believe that God, they had to worship the sun was the god. Probably something important in metaphysical ancient Egyptian discussion was the notion if the sun, the moon was the sun or not, what returned with a different face, or if it was a completely different god, right? And so, anyways, the notion of worshiping light and the sun's light as worshiping God's light, this was a very crucial notion because the light in your eyes is existence. Do you see? You worship light, but without light there would be nothing to worship. So it is ultimate in some sense, sensory wise. So light is divine. Any creature that finds himself in natural light feels as if there's something occurring in the subconscious domain. But anyways, it's not just about objective light. I'm just saying, like, the significance given to the instantaneity of the presence of a world as the consciousness comes into a sort of fruition of acknowledgement of it. Carl Jung has this incredible quote. He says, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will dictate your life and you will call it fate." And that's like that idea is incredible. It's so easy not to care for the world, to stay in your domain of comfortable navigation. But a pilot is not defined by moments where they can fly clear skies, but how much they endeavor beyond the limits of the conscious reality, how much they realize the awareness and the minds of the human being is more important than just their body. You acknowledge somebody who has just a physical body, you have forgotten who they could be, who they have been, and who they are now being. This is why you can never be convinced. For me, when people speak, I can never get angry at anything anybody tells me, because I know what they're saying is just their first attempt at what they've seen. A sort of reaction, response of nature, as if a bird flies on the something like flies on a branch of a tree, you know, and that same simplicity of existential activity is like the same as like somebody fighting or something. It's like existence on some design level has no meaning, yet at the same time as their free will exists, there's the meaning. The meaning is kind of imposed and driven and returned, and pretty much all the verbs of your mind kind of move in your attention. In the Lotus Sutra, there's an incredible quote. It says, "Keep your mind alive and free, without abiding in anywhere or anything." This was in the Lotus Sutra. You have one lifetime to really see what's going on here. And the alertness and intelligence will activate in the presence of a greater vision. A greater vision doesn't mean the future has to be in a certain way. It just means life is worth living because as you live it, it shifts into various different values. You know, you're never going to know who you're going to be in 10 years, but you kind of go continue because every day is like a gift. Every day, regardless whether it's something good or bad, that happens, you're seeing new dimensions, new ways life is. So once you become not grateful for just your physical survival resources in this life, but you become grateful for how existence is even in the presence of your attention, then there's a sort of bliss arises. Because conscious existence is a content. It's a sort of ultimate contentment that arises. It's as if first the person has to get enlightened, then the person has to enlighten the world, but then the person sees they have to enlighten themselves from the world, and then the world from themselves. And that's the beauty of death, that as you leave, there is the value of what you have done. Rise, mankind, rise. Much blessings and namaste.